Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, well, his book, Needy Media, How Tech Gets Personal, is out through McGill-Queen's University Press. Stephen Monteiro joins me on the program. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I have a confession to make. When I first heard about this book, I assumed it was about social media. That the topic of like harvesting our data or something. But this goes deeper. This goes into the essentially the argument that like the device itself is needy. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about like kind of the genesis of this idea for you.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. And it came out of I guess it came out in part, it came out of my own practice with these kinds of smart devices, particularly with the smartphones, but also to a certain extent with tablets. Um, and it really was that idea that there's something that keeps us interested in the device, that we like to pick up these devices, we like to handle these devices. The way that the devices behave for us oftentimes is pleasant and engaging. And so I wrote the book really as a sort of counter to a lot of the discussion that was going on and continues to go on about our dependency on social media. And actually, more and more, sort of as I was finishing the book and now that the book is out, also you see the discussions now about our dependency on AI and chatbots and our relationships with chatbots and how we can sort of have affective or emotional relationships with chatbots. And my claim is that while all of that is true, it's also really important to look at the actual object that we have on our hands or that we have strapped to our wrist, and think about the ways that these kinds of objects also sort of foster that dependency and sort of create a sort of nurturing aspect in us in terms of behaving with these devices and interacting with these devices and having strong psychological ties, not just with the things that we access through these devices on the various networks that we use, but actually our psychological relationship and dependency on the devices as well.
So do you see this as a drilling down of sorts that like on the surface level, there's the apps, but then like going further into it and like kind of looking at the architecture of this, that you understand kind of more about why we have these fixations?
Yes, but also I would say that when we think about the surface level is the object itself, right? But we start interacting with the object before we even open any of the apps, right? And I think that it works on multiple levels. But what's really interesting to me is that and maybe some of the listeners can think about this is the way that we reach for our device and interact with it when we don't necessarily have any particular app maybe that we have in mind when we pick it up, right? And once we pick it up and we start interacting with it, maybe then we start moving around, looking at things on different apps. But there also is that relationship, the very basic sort of superficial relationship with the device. I mean, if I could use one example with this, is the way that face recognition locks work. And more and more of these devices have face recognition locks and people use them and basically what happens is the moment you pick up the device and you turn the screen toward you, the device opens up. It recognizes your face and it opens up for you. And if your friend picks up your phone, it's not going to open up for them. And so then even before we start looking at any other content that might be on the phone or accessing our social media feeds or whatever it may be, there already is that small but but important interaction with the device where there's that sense of recognizing and that sense of knowing us. And in fact, really all the device is doing, it's made a map of the sort of the contours of our face, and it's stores that map. And so whenever the device is turned to us, the infrared projection flashes on our face, and basically it matches up those contours to what's in the device, right? But the way that we might feel it at a psychological level is that the device recognizes us and knows us, and behaves a certain way with us, that it doesn't behave with strangers, just in the same way that with it works with real people, right? So when we're walking on the street and we cross paths with somebody we know, a friend of ours or something, our face changes, in recognition of that person. And we sort of, when we're walking by a bunch of strangers, right, our face is a certain way, but then it lights up when we see somebody we know. So it's really these small interactions that happen from the very moment that we pick up the device or look at the device.
This kind of touches on something I wanted to broach with you. And so this notion of your phone recognizes you, but not your friend.
Hmm.
I want to talk about Sherry Turkle, because you reference
Yes.
her multiple times, and particularly about this, line between intimacy and solitude,
Hmm.
right? That there's this relationship with your device, but that like isolates you,
Hmm.
or like hives off your friend, let's say, in the example that you're using. And so she, you quote her as saying, calling technology the architect of our intimacies. I'm wondering, like, if you can talk about kind of your relationship to Turkle, and like how you explored her ideas within this book.
Yeah, well, I think Turkle's been very important over the years, and Turkle's been looking at this since the start of personal computing, and one of the reasons that I reference Turkle at multiple points in the book is because the book as well really looks at sort of that historical trajectory from the development of personal computers in the 1970s, all the way up to the present, to sort of see how we got to this place and this situation, and this relationship that I'm describing. Um, and for Turkle, yeah, one of the things that's very important is thinking about the way that our relationships with devices can some way in some ways mimic our relationships with other people and with other living things, because Turkle also looks at digital pets and that, which is also something that I discuss in the book. But the big question, and really one of the things that Turkle has warned about is, um, to what extent to what extent does our relationship with our devices replace our relationships with other people? And I think that's a really important question to ask, because what's interesting with these devices, I mean, a, 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 a big part of their usefulness, and a big part of our dependency on them, is the fact that they're networked, right? So that we can interact with other things, but also we can interact with other people through these devices, and we do that all the time when we're texting, when we're on social media. We can look at all sorts of examples with that. But one of the issues that comes up here is that, one, we can have this relationship with the device where we're not interacting with other people. And, social media is actually a good example, because, you can get on your phone, you get on social media, and you may not actually post anything, you may not comment on anything, you may not, send folks any messages through social media. And even though that's a lot of content that people have put up there, you're not actually interacting with the people, right? You're just interacting with the platform. You're interacting with the algorithm. Um, and so one of the things that we can think about in terms of Turkle and these devices and intimacy is that we tend to oftentimes lean on these devices in situations that basically sort of cut off our relationships with other people or our interactions with other people. Um, Another example I would give with this, another thing that I talk about in the book that's very important in terms of this close relationship with our devices is geolocation, right? So the way that we use GPS and these other things, and and when we use these, I mean, they're very helpful. There's something that on a psychological level, one of the things that they do is they give us a sense that the device is us, right? That we are the device and the device is us. And what I mean by that is when we open up geolocation, say on our phone, to see where we are, to see what path to take, that sort of thing. That dot that's there on the map that sort of situates us, what it actually is situating is the device, right? It's the device communicating with the network. But when we see that dot, we think of it as ourselves, and that's another way that this strong dependency um, is built. But to get back to what we were talking about with sort of relationships with people and how that might impact it, um, one of the things that we find then is when we use these geolocation features, one of the things that it does is it reduces our interactions with people in our environment. And a really simple example of this is, prior to carrying around phones that would be able to locate us in this way, if we were walking down the street and we were trying to find, where a certain restaurant was, or to find where a certain cross street was, or these sorts of places, we would we would stop someone on the street and just say, excuse me, do you know where this place is, or do you know where that place is, or do you know where the bus stop is? And we do that less and less now because we're able to sort of find these things with our devices. And what it does, I mean, this is something that I don't talk about so much in the book, but that's really important, is that it it really sort of breaks down sort of the social cohesion that we have in society, because our social cohesion is not just our close friends, it's not just our close family members, but our social cohesion is actually those small interactions or small sort of um, senses of understanding with people that we don't know, right? That are just part of our city or part of our town, part of our community. Um, and those really small interactions, they build a certain bond across society, a certain sense of solidarity, even though they seem like they're kind of, small and perhaps not very meaningful. And our devices get in the way of that more and more, I think. And that's one way I would say that even though we're building this relationship with the device where it feels sort of like a companion, sort of a safe place for us, or something we want to make sure that we have in our hand, and when it's not there, we feel maybe kind of lost or abandoned. Um, but there's also this aspect at the same time that that's happening. What that does is it kind of reduces our sort of sense of other people as other humans that we cross in physical spaces, and that we, even though we don't talk to them very often, when we ask them a question of like where the bus stop is or something, we're building those social bonds. And a lot of that has just been picked up by the device, and of course has been picked up by the platforms that we access on the device. All of these, again, social media is a big one, but we can look at other sorts of apps and platforms as well.
I'm with you 100% on that point. I was talking with a friend recently about how people behave at concerts these days. And we've kind of
Mm,
like, everyone's got their phone up and in the way of other people. And we just kind of behave in a different way as a result of these devices. You mentioned that, that this was a point you kind of essentially left out of the book. And I'm curious about kind of how you come to the decision of like what's in the book and what isn't. You mentioned that, you built on Turkle, like looking at personal computers and, Tamagotchis and things like that, that like, how you determine the breadth of the book, the scope of the book, and like what doesn't get included.
well, yeah, I mean, uh, so there are a couple of of responses to that. Sometimes there are just ideas that you don't really have in your head while you're writing the book, and then as you're finishing the book, um, these come up, but then it's too late. The manuscript is already in production, and you can't really make any changes at that point. Um, but also, and that's why I say, for example, I talk a little bit about our relationship with AI in the book, but not as much as I probably would say if I were publishing the book, next year and finishing it up now, because there are always changes in the tech world, right, from year to year. But really, in terms of thinking about sort of the frame of the book and what its scope would be, there were two things that were interesting to me. One is that sort of relationship that we have with the device and how this sort of psychological bond develops with the device based on the different kinds of features that the device has. So I've talked already a little bit about face recognition locks and geolocation, but we can also think about things like touch screen sensitivity and how the phone can react, or the device can react to our touch in different ways. Vibration and how vibration works, such that there's some people have phantom vibration syndrome. I know I've had this where you feel like your phone is vibrating, and you reach into your pocket to get it, and it's not there, but there's this psychological sense that the phone is with you, and the phone is trying to get your attention. Um, and then the different kinds of motion and audio sensors and these sorts of things are on the device. So I really looked at those and tried to develop an argument about how these different features can produce that kind of psychological pull and that sense of intimacy. So that was one thing I wanted to do. And then the second thing that really interested me was the historical development of all of this. And one of the reasons to kind of think about that was I wanted to move away from the sense that all of this kind of started with the development of smartphones. About 15, 20 years ago, and actually point out that a lot of these features developed in different ways for different purposes much earlier. And so I really go back to the 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, and see what sort of technological features were developed for different kinds of devices. So things like if we look at vibration, the way that vibration alerts came out of pagers that existed that people would be using in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, that would basically just let you know that you had an incoming phone call, but it was something that you would carry on your body and it would vibrate. Um, the way that geolocation started with GPS, with the U.S. military, that it was the military applications, and then afterwards it was put into devices that would be used by sailors and by hikers or outdoors people, to be able to know what their location was, and also to be locatable if anything went wrong. Um, and the invention of the development of digital pets like Tamagotchi, and really the way that alerts, the kinds of beeps that you would get with Tamagotchi, and the interactions you would have to keep to keep the digital creature happy, very much works with the way that, say, alerts work today, push notifications and these kinds of things. And then also the updating that we have to do with our phones to keep them functioning. And so really I wanted to tie those two things together. So this long history of these kinds of features that are developed, that can be useful in certain ways, that then all sort of converge on these mobile devices that we carry with us today, um, to develop this really rich sort of interactive device that can produce a very sort of nuanced and sophisticated psychological relationship with it. So that was really what I wanted to look at the book in the book, excuse me, to think about um, what where we are today in terms of this dependency, and then think a little bit about how we got there.
And even looking at, historic advertisings for personal computers and the way that like we anthropomorphize or describe these as like give them people traits or, describe them in some way as a personalized thing, kind
Hmm.
of ties to today's kind of like, you know, creating your screensaver or, making it your own.
Yeah, and well, also something I didn't mention. I also spend time on in needy media, um, is the role of the mouse and the cursor, right? And how that
And pointing,
um,
yeah.
that point on the screen, and I kind of tie that a bit into how geolocation works, right? But that idea of the arrow that's on the screen as we move the mouse around, that arrow, it's like an extension of our finger, and so we really feel like we're interacting with the computer through that point on the screen, right? Um, and that develops a different relationship, say, and we can even think about this today, right? It's a very different relationship with that desktop computer than if you sort of put the mouse away and you just rely on the keyboard to interact with it. So all of these things, there's not any one thing that we can point to that says to us, this is really where that kind of dependency develops from, or or this is the moment where the device sort of becomes our new best friend or our closest sort of confidant. Um, but it's really the combination of all of these things working together that produces that.
This may be a stretch, but I was watching a 1950s noir recently, and I noticed the way people like hold cigarettes or cigarette packs
Hmm.
kind of reminds me of how people hold their phones now. Like they're
Yes.
like kind of, flipping them around and just like that crutch that like maybe we've always had some sort of need for something like this. And
Hmm.
that, because of the prevalence of phones versus, the fact that smoking has been banned in so many places, maybe that like this was replaced the cigarette pack as like some sort of physical crutch, but even more so like psychological now that we've, harvested our memory to it and, put things we need to look up or the directions to where we need to get to or the appointments we need to keep that it's heightened
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, I mean, again, this sense of security that it produces for us. Um, that's why, what's really important, I think, is to think about how that sense of security is developed. Um, not only in terms of, again, what we can access through the networks with the device, but actually our our relationship with the device itself and our interactions with the device itself. So you can think about, the listeners can think about those occasions where they might be holding the phone in their hand when they're not really using the device, but they're keeping it in their in their hand, and it feels comfortable, right? It feels reassuring. Oftentimes I think it's in terms of particularly in those moments where we feel a bit alienated or a bit uncomfortable in our surroundings, that our phone really feels like sort of an anchor for us, that it produces that that sense of safety for us. And of course, we can talk about, you brought up cigarettes and smoking. We can also talk about the addictive aspects of this as well, right? And certainly when we start talking about the networks, and my book isn't very much about thinking about these devices on their own, but also realizing that this in part feeds into how we use these networks and how we use these platforms, that there is, of course, that that addictive element of that, opening up my phone because there might be something new there, right? There might be some sort of change there. The phone, it always seems to have something new for us, right? And we find that we just turn to it again and again because we want a sense of interaction, but we also want to have a sense that that we're part of something, um, that we're linked to something. And as I said, the platforms play a huge role in this. The various apps that we use play a huge role in this. But that sense of belonging and having some sort of link, as I say, it really starts with the phone and the way that the phone reacts to us, so that when we pick up the phone or look at it, when we start interacting with the touch screen, right, that the touch screen responds to us, and we even see in the way that the software is developed with touch screen interactivity, if we are looking at something on the phone and we scroll to the end or we pull on the edge, that there's actually change in the lighting on the phone so that it looks like we're tugging on something that is or interacting with something that is sort of soft and elastic when it's not soft and elastic. It's a piece of glass, but that, as I say in the book, it kind of mimics the way that touch and skin works as well, right? If you take your thumb and you press it into the palm of your hand, you'll see that around the spot where you're pressing that there's a change in the blood flow, so it turns sort of red, right? And similar sort of things we have with touchscreen sensitivity. And so these again are sorts of things that can be very comforting to us, that are independent of how we might use the phone to access different apps or to connect to other people or other things.
And as you point out, these were designed responses, right? Like pressing your thumb into your palm. I
Yes.
mean, obviously that's like just a biological thing, but that someone thought through how these things would respond. Like when you reach the end of an article and it would like stretch and then bounce back and things. Someone made the choice to have it respond in this way, purposefully.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's, and again, sometimes we talk about our experiences with technological devices, and we talk about how natural they seem or how intuitive they seem. And it's these sorts of small, these sort of features or properties of the device that can produce that sense of naturalness, right? So again, that the feeling of that, you interact with the touch screen, that feeling of the sensitivity of it and the sort of the elasticity of it. That elasticity it's a visual effect. It's not something that's actually happening, something that you can feel with your fingers. It's a visual effect, but psychologically, it produces that sense of, that we're interacting with the surface that is a soft sort of skin-like surface rather than a hard piece of glass.
Well, there's lots to unpack in Needy Media. I appreciate you taking time to talk about some of it, Stephen. Thanks very much for your time, and congratulations on the release of the book.
Sure, thank you. I was very happy to be here, and it was a great conversation.